The cannons roar like thunder across the Golden Horn. The year is 1453, and 21-year-old Sultan Mehmed II stands before the massive walls of Constantinople, the last jewel of the Byzantine Empire. For over 1,000 years, these walls have never fallen to direct assault, though the city once fell to crusaders through betrayal in 1204. But this young Ottoman ruler has a secret weapon that will change warfare forever. In 53 days, he will accomplish what countless armies before him could not. He will bring down an empire that has stood since Constantine the Great founded it in 330 CE, the last remnant of Rome's Eastern legacy. But this story begins long before the first cannon fired. It starts with a dying empire, a brilliant young sultan, and a Hungarian engineer whose invention would reshape the world. Constantinople, in 1453, was a shadow of its former glory. Once the greatest city on earth, it now holds fewer than 50,000 people within walls built for 500,000. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome itself, had shrunk to little more than the city and a few surrounding villages. Emperor Constantine XI ruled over what many called a ghost empire. Yet the city still mattered strategically. Constantinople controlled the only sea route between Europe and Asia. Every ship carrying spices from India, silk from China, or grain from Egypt had to pass through the Bosphorus. Though the city was now impoverished and struggling, its location remained incredibly valuable for controlling this vital trade route. More importantly, it was the heart of Eastern Christianity, home to the Hagia Sophia, one of the world's greatest churches. The Ottomans had tried to take Constantinople before. They had surrounded it, besieged it, and attacked it multiple times over the past century. Each time those legendary walls held firm. Built by Emperor Theodosius II in the 5th century, the walls stretched 4 miles across the landward side of the city. They rose up to 40 feet high and were up to 20 feet thick. Behind the main wall stood a second wall, and behind that, a third. No army had ever broken through them by direct assault, but Mehmed II was different from the sultans who came before him. Born in 1432, he became sultan at age 12, lost the throne in a palace coup, then won it back at 19. His enemies called him a boy. His own advisors thought he was too young and too reckless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Mehmed was highly educated and spoke several languages. He studied mathematics, philosophy, and military engineering. While other rulers relied on tradition, Mehmed embraced new ideas. He understood that the world was changing, and he intended to change with it. His dream was not just to conquer Constantinople, but to restore the glory of the old Roman Empire under Ottoman rule. He even called himself Caesar of Rome. The young sultan knew that traditional siege methods would not work against Constantinople's walls, so he sought out the most advanced military technology of his time. In 1452, a Hungarian engineer named Orban arrived at his court with an extraordinary proposal. Orban had first offered his services to Emperor Constantine XI. The Byzantine emperor desperately needed help, but he could not afford to pay what Orban demanded. The engineer then traveled to the Ottoman court, where Mehmed immediately saw the potential. Orban promised to build cannons larger and more powerful than any the world had ever seen. The Sultan gave Orban unlimited resources. The Hungarian engineer built a foundry at Adrianople and began work on his masterpiece. The result was a monster cannon 27 feet long, weighing 19 tons. It could fire stone balls weighing over half a ton for more than a mile. When they tested it, the sound could be heard 10 miles away, and the cannonball buried itself 6 feet deep in the earth. But Orban's great cannon was just one of many. Mehmed assembled an artillery train of over 60 cannons, including several other massive guns. No army in history had ever brought such firepower to a siege. The age of gunpowder warfare had truly begun, and Constantinople would be its first great victim. As winter turned to spring in 1453, Mehmed began moving his forces into position. His army numbered between 80,000 and 100,000 men, making it one of the largest military forces ever assembled in medieval times. They came from across the Ottoman Empire, Turkish cavalry from Anatolia, Janissary infantry from the Balkans, engineers from Hungary, and sailors from the Black Sea ports. The Byzantines watched this massive force gather with growing dread. Emperor Constantine XI had perhaps 8,000 defenders, including about 2,000 foreign volunteers. The most famous of these was Giovanni Giustiniani, a Genoese soldier who brought 700 men and years of experience in siege warfare. But even with these reinforcements, the defenders were outnumbered more than 10 to 1. Constantine XI knew his situation was hopeless, but he refused to surrender. When Mehmed offered him safe passage and a comfortable retirement if he would give up the city, the emperor replied that he would rather die than abandon his people and his faith. This was not mere stubbornness. Constantine understood that he was the last emperor of Byzantium, the final link in a chain stretching back over 1,000 years to Constantine the Great. If Constantinople fell, that chain would be broken forever. The siege began on April 6, 1453, when Ottoman forces completely surrounded the city by land. But Mehmed faced a problem that had frustrated previous attackers. Constantinople sat on a peninsula, protected by water on 3 sides. The Golden Horn, a natural harbor on the city's north side, was blocked by a massive chain stretched between 2 towers. Byzantine and Genoese ships controlled this harbor, allowing supplies to reach the city by sea. Mehmed's solution was audacious beyond belief. If he could not sail his ships into the Golden Horn, he would carry them there overland. On the night of April the 22nd, Ottoman workers built a wooden road over the hills behind the harbor. They greased the logs with animal fat and used teams of oxen to drag 70 ships up one side of the hill and down the other, directly into the Golden Horn. The Byzantines woke that morning to find enemy ships floating in their supposedly secure harbor. It was a psychological blow as much as a military one. If the Ottomans could move ships over mountains, what else might they accomplish? But the real destruction came from Orban's cannons. Day after day, the great guns pounded the ancient walls. The massive stone balls, each weighing as much as a horse, smashed into fortifications that had stood for 1,000 years. Slowly, inevitably, cracks began to appear. The defenders fought back with desperate courage. They repaired the walls each night, using whatever materials they could find. They hung leather hides and bales of wool to absorb the impact of cannonballs. They dug trenches behind the walls to slow any Ottoman breakthrough. Giovanni Giustiniani organized the defense with skill and determination, moving his men to wherever the danger was greatest. Yet everyone knew the walls were failing. Each day brought new damage that was harder to repair. The great cannon could only fire about 7 times per day because it took so long to reload and cool down, but each shot did tremendous damage. Smaller cannons fired more frequently, gradually wearing down the fortifications. As May turned toward its end, Mehmed prepared for his final assault. But first, he made one last offer to the city. If Constantinople surrendered, he promised to spare all its inhabitants and allow them to keep their property and religion. If they continued to resist, he would give the city to his soldiers for 3 days of looting, as was the custom in siege warfare. Emperor Constantine XI gathered his remaining nobles and citizens in the Hagia Sophia for a final council. The great church, with its soaring dome and golden mosaics, had been the heart of Byzantine Christianity for nearly 1,000 years. Now it might witness the empire's final moments. The emperor spoke simply and directly. He would not surrender the city that had been entrusted to his care. Those who wished to leave could do so with his blessing, but he would stay and fight to the end. Most of the defenders chose to stay with him. That night, Constantine XI walked the walls one final time, speaking with his soldiers and thanking them for their service. He removed all signs of his imperial rank, choosing to die as a simple soldier rather than as an emperor. It was a gesture that would be remembered long after his empire had fallen. The final assault began before dawn on May 29, 1453. Mehmed had planned it carefully, sending wave after wave of attackers against different sections of the wall. First came the irregular troops, meant to tire the defenders and use up their ammunition. Then came the regular infantry, probing for weak points. Finally would come the janissaries, the elite troops who had never failed to take a position they attacked. The battle raged for hours. The Byzantines fought with the fury of men who knew they were making their last stand. Giovanni Giustiniani seemed to be everywhere at once, rallying his men and leading counterattacks against Ottoman breakthroughs. For a time, it seemed the walls might hold once more. Then disaster struck the defenders. A cannonball wounded Giustiniani severely, and his men carried him from the walls to seek medical treatment. Seeing their commander fall, many of the Genoese defenders lost heart and began to retreat. At almost the same moment, some Ottoman soldiers discovered that a small gate in the wall had been left unlocked. The janissaries poured through this opening and attacked the main wall from behind. Caught between enemies in front and behind, the Byzantine defense collapsed. Emperor Constantine XI threw off his purple cloak and charged into the thickest fighting, sword in hand. He was never seen alive again. Later, his body was found among the common soldiers, identified only by the purple boots that marked his imperial rank. By midday, Constantinople had fallen. The last Byzantine emperor was dead, and the Ottoman flag flew over the walls that had protected the city for 1,000 years. Mehmed II, now 21 years old, had accomplished what no ruler before him had managed. He had conquered the Queen of Cities and made himself heir to the Roman Empire. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Europe. For over 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire had served as a buffer between Christian Europe and the Islamic world. Now that the buffer was gone, Ottoman armies stood at the gates of Europe itself. Within decades, they would be besieging Vienna and threatening the heart of the continent. But the conquest also marked the beginning of a new age. Mehmed II proved to be a relatively tolerant ruler who allowed Christians and Jews to practice their faith, though with certain restrictions and limitations. He rebuilt Constantinople, now called Istanbul, and made it the capital of a vast empire that would last for another 4 centuries. The Hagia Sophia became a mosque, but many of its Christian mosaics were covered rather than destroyed, preserving them for future generations. The fall also had unexpected consequences for world history. Many Byzantine scholars fled to Western Europe, bringing with them ancient Greek texts that had been lost in the West. These manuscripts helped fuel the Renaissance and the rediscovery of classical learning. Strangely, the fall of the last remnant of the Roman Empire helped give birth to the modern world. Urban's great cannons changed warfare forever. Within decades, every major army in Europe had artillery trains. Castle walls that had protected medieval lords for centuries gradually became less effective as military technology advanced. The age of gunpowder had begun, and with it, the modern military era. Perhaps most importantly, the conquest opened new trade routes and connections between East and West. The Ottoman Empire became a bridge between Europe and Asia, facilitating significant trade and cultural exchange. Spices, silk, and ideas flowed through Istanbul, making it one of the world's great cosmopolitan cities. Mehmed II lived up to his nickname, the Conqueror. He went on to expand the Ottoman Empire across the Balkans and into Eastern Europe, but he never forgot that his greatest achievement was the conquest of Constantinople. He had succeeded where countless others had failed, bringing down walls that had stood for a millennium and ending an empire that traced its roots to ancient Rome. The young sultan, who had been dismissed as too inexperienced and too ambitious, had proven his critics wrong in the most dramatic way possible. In 53 days of siege, he had changed the course of world history. The medieval era was coming to a close, and the modern world was emerging. At the center of that transformation stood a 21-year-old Ottoman sultan and the city he had made his own. Today, Istanbul remains one of the world's great cities, a bridge between Europe and Asia, between East and West, between the ancient world and the modern one. The walls that Mehmed's cannons breached still stand in places, reminders of the day when the age of gunpowder announced itself with thunder that echoed across the world. The fall of Constantinople was not just the end of an empire, but the beginning of a new chapter in human history, written in smoke and fire by a young conqueror who dared to dream of making the impossible possible.